The God of mercy and justice be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. At that time, Jesus exclaimed, I give praise to you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, for although you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, you have revealed them to little ones. Yes, Father, such has been your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wishes to reveal him. Come to me, all who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves, for my yoke is easy and my burden light. The Gospel of the Lord. A nearby family is being forced to move out of the apartment they've rented for more than a decade. Their search for a new home is filled with obstacles. For example, unlike before, prospective renters now must have a valid Social Security number, and one person in the household must have a full-time job. In this family, 3 of the 4 members are employed, but none full-time. And their IRS ID numbers are not acceptable. Yet more barriers to another family of color in our neighborhood. Another nearby family had their rent come due this last week, but because of the pandemic and subsequent job losses, they didn't have the money. They're very much afraid of being evicted. She works a couple of days a week at minimum wage in a large box store and is always hoping for an extra shift or 2, but since COVID, she's lucky to keep her regular shifts. He lost his job, 2 months ago now? Finally, just last week, the box store hired him too, but his first paycheck is still a week or 2 out. How to pay the rent and make the car payment and the power bill, let alone put food on the table. The burdens these families carry are anything but light, and unfortunately all too common in our neighborhood. Economic stress, inferior education, extraordinary health risks, and both subtle and blatant racial discrimination. Their yoke is oppressive and unrelenting. When Jesus promises rest and an easy yoke in today's gospel, it is as if he knows precisely how such burdens feel. Let's take a brief look at today's readings from the prophet Zechariah and the Gospel of Matthew. First, this analogy. Imagine the person, man or woman, who had just landed a terrific business deal and was victorious over their competitor and made millions for themselves and their company. And imagine that this person has always craved a sleek, expensive sports car, and now can get it and flaunt it and their success. Think of the impression on the neighbors their grand entrance will make when pulling into the driveway for the first time. This is just how kings, dictators, despots, and conquering leaders have behaved since, Old Testament times. By contrast, we hear the prophet Zechariah today tell us of a Savior who rides in on a donkey, signifying peace and humility. And his words are familiar to us because they were later applied to Jesus. See, your king shall come to you. A just Savior is he, meek and riding on an ass. And he shall proclaim peace to the nations. And this king, this Savior, full of humility, beckons each one of us. Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart. You will find rest for yourselves, for my yoke is easy and my burden light. But what is this easy yoke that Jesus offers? Just how can he lighten the burden? As I see it, the only way Jesus' promises can be fulfilled is through us. We must shoulder some of the load. Since the pandemic hit, how many times have you heard or read the slogan, "We're all in this together"? That's sort of what I'm talking about. We're all in this together. But isn't it interesting that that's not the slogan we're hearing when we talk about or think about racial justice, racial inequality? And I'm quite sure that's not how people of color see it. And I'm certain that's not how the two families I mentioned earlier see it. We're all in this together? Really? Doesn't feel like it. You see, many of us have this invisible package of unearned assets that we can cash in on every day to make our lives easier and our burdens lighter, all the while remaining mostly oblivious to them. And others don't get the package, and their burdens are heavy and their yoke is oppressive. And to add insult to injury, then some of us wonder, why can't they succeed? Why can't they do better? What do I mean by this package of unearned assets? Let me show you. Let me give you a couple of examples. As a child, you had access to books where the heroes and protagonists were the same race or color as you. You can land a good job without having coworkers suspect you got it because of your race. You can turn on the television, open a newspaper, and see people of your race widely represented. You know your skin color won't work against the appearance of your financial reliability. You know your skin color won't work against you when you need medical or legal help. If a police officer stops you, you can be sure you haven't been singled out because of your race. You can do well without being called a credit to your race. And you are never asked to speak for your entire racial group. These are just but a few of the many assets many of us have, and yet many others don't. These are the things that make the difference between getting by and going under. Being able to pay the rent and the power bill instead of having to choose between the two. The families I mentioned earlier, they don't have the package. And many persons and families of our parish don't have the package. We have to figure out how to share the assets and bring everyone under the umbrella of these benefits. The first step is to be aware of them and aware if you have them. It's not bad if you have the assets. It's only bad if we fail to share them. In so doing, we will begin to lighten their burdens and ease the yoke of oppression. And then what about the rest that Jesus offers? And I will give you rest. I don't think it means simply less work and more sleep. Sorry. Rather, rest happens with alignment, meaning we align the work we do in the world with the work God is doing in the world. St. Augustine said it beautifully. Our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Rest comes when we live in harmony with ourselves, our neighbor, and God.